20 elite skydivers boarded a vintage World War II bomber for what was supposed to be a thrilling high-altitude thank you flight. Free of charge, courtesy of a grateful pilot. The weather, far from ideal. Thick clouds smothered the sky. But these weren't amateurs. They were seasoned pros, some with hundreds of jumps under their belts. Then came the fatal chain of errors. A misread radar, a pilot flying blind, and one devastating decision to leap, despite never seeing the ground. Moments later, 18 parachutes bloomed over what they thought was land, but beneath the clouds was water. Icy, merciless Lake Erie. 16 never made it home. This is the true story of the deadliest accident in the history of recreational skydiving. A tragic cocktail of overconfidence, miscommunication, and a brutal twist of fate. Let me take you back to August the 27th, 1967. It was the kind of day that should have felt exhilarating. A rare opportunity, a special favour. At a quite rural airstrip just outside Wakeman, Ohio, Ortner Airport, a group of about 30 skydiving enthusiasts had gathered. And not just any group. Among the crowd were 30 of skydiving's most accomplished hobbyists, men and one woman who had made dozens, even hundreds of jumps before. They came for a high-altitude jump from a North American B-25 Mitchell bomber, an iconic World War II aircraft now repurposed for something far less deadly. Or so they thought. The pilot, Bob Kearns, owned the bomber himself. He was a well-known figure in the skydiving community, offering the flight free of charge, as a goodwill gesture in return for a past favour. It was meant to be fun, but no one knew it would end as the most devastating day skydiving had ever seen. The weather was far from perfect. That morning, visibility was near zero, just a dense ceiling of clouds stretching horizon to horizon. Anyone with real experience knew what that meant. Skydiving guidelines are crystal clear. If you can't see your target, you don't jump. But by late afternoon, the clouds seemed to lift just enough. And when you've got adrenaline junkies with something to prove and a warbird on the runway, restraint starts to look like cowardice. The B-25 was a powerful machine, but not built for skydiving. Its fuselage was cramped and space was limited. Faced with tough choices, Kearns made a decision that, though he didn't know it then, would end up saving lives. Only the 20 most experienced jumpers would go. The remaining 10, frustrated, were left behind. They thought they were missing out on the jump of a lifetime. In truth, they were escaping death. Inside the aircraft, the mood was upbeat. There was confident chatter and the kind of anticipation that only comes before a big jump. Of the 20 selected to board the B-25, nearly all were certified by the US Parachute Association, with some boasting over 200 jumps. This was not an amateur flight. The plan was simple. Climb to 20,000 feet where 18 jumpers would leap over Ortner Airport. Then the plane would ascend to 30,000 feet for the final two to make their ultra-high altitude drop. Also in the sky that day was Ted Murphy flying a Cessna 180. He planned to film the jumpers from above, capturing the fall from a safe distance as a kind of celebratory documentary. But what none of them knew, pilot, jumpers or observers, was that one small miscalculation was already unfolding. One that would send 18 parachutes floating gracefully straight into a nightmare. The jump was supposed to be spectacular, a high-altitude thrill ride captured on film featuring 20 of the best skydivers in the game. And for the first hour, things seemed to be going to plan, at least on the surface. Bob Kearns piloted the propeller-driven B-25 bomber into a slow spiral climb above Ortner Airport. Built for war, not altitude precision, the World War II relic groaned its way towards 20,000 feet. The ascent was long and cold. Inside the aircraft, the atmosphere was buzzing, but also freezing. The B-25 had no heating, no insulation, and certainly no business flying in sub-zero stratosphere. The jumpers, used to cold conditions, had layered up with heavy boots, gloves, and parkas pulled over their jumpsuits. At altitude, the temperature hovered somewhere between -20 and -30 Fahrenheit. No one complained. It was just part of the deal. The jumpers were crammed into narrow, awkward seating. Some perched on makeshift benches in the bomb bay, others resting their feet on the bomb bay doors, barely able to see out. It was dim, claustrophobic and utterly blinding to what lay below. A few jumpers later recalled how the lack of visibility made it impossible to determine cloud thickness or what might be beneath it. Meanwhile, in a smaller aircraft trailing behind them, Ted Murphy flew his Cessna 180 Skywagon. A skydiving enthusiast and friend to the community, Murphy wasn't planning to jump, he just wanted to capture the descent on film. He'd brought along another jumper-turned-passenger who'd missed out on a seat in the B-25. Together they climbed to around 12,000 feet, hoping to hover above the drop zone with a camera ready. But behind the scenes, where no camera could see, something was going very wrong. Despite hopes it would clear, the clouds still clung overhead. Visibility? Zero. That meant the only thing guiding both aircraft was radio communication with Cleveland Air Traffic Control, and a system that was deeply flawed. This wasn't the era of GPS, it was 1967. Pilots navigated the skies with a mix of dead reckoning, visual references, and VOR signals. These were VHF radio beacons that gave rough position and direction. But the B-25 had a rudimentary radio system. It could either talk to air traffic control or receive the VOR signal, but not both at the same time. That meant that Kearns was flying partially blind, switching back and forth between guidance systems and trying to pin down his location in a sky of cotton-thick cloud. At one point during the flight, Kearns mentioned to his co-pilot that he wasn't feeling well. His face was flushed and his behaviour slightly off. The co-pilot adjusted Kearns' oxygen, after which he seemed to improve. When the B-25 finally reached 20,000 feet, Kearns made a call. He radioed Cleveland for a heading to the drop zone at Ortner Airport. And then, without a single soul on board realising it, came the error that would change everything. There had just been a shift change at the control centre. The new controller on duty, Engel Schmitz, looked at his radar and believed he had a lock on the B-25. But he didn't. He was tracking Murphy's Cessna instead. He gave Kearns a heading, believing it would guide them over Ortner. But it wouldn't. That heading sent them drifting slowly and unknowingly out over the vast cold waters of Lake Erie. No one on the B-25 realised it. Not the pilot, not the jumpers, not even the spotters. The clouds were too thick. The plane was off course and no one could see the truth beneath them. In the Cessna, Murphy squinted through the haze, puzzled. He couldn't see the B-25 ahead, even though air traffic control assured him he was only 6 miles behind. Something didn't add up. But there was no way to confirm it, not without visuals, and certainly not with radar that had just mistaken one plane for another. Below the clouds, a different world waited, and it wasn't Ortner Airport. It was open water. It was just after 4 p.m. when Bob Kearns gave the order. Inside the belly of the B-25, the jumpmaster relayed the signal, and one by one, like clockwork, 18 seasoned skydivers hurled themselves into the sky. It took less than 30 seconds for them all to be out. This wasn't just a casual hop. It was a choreographed group freefall, the kind of thing that takes precision, timing and trust. They'd done this before, but never like this. As the final figure disappeared from the bomb bay, the bomber peeled upwards, climbing towards 30,000 feet for the next round. 2 more skydivers still waiting for their turn. Down below, the others were in freefall, racing through cold, blind sky. They'd planned to deploy their parachutes at around 2,500 feet over Ortner Airfield, just like every jump before. But something felt wrong. In that narrow, dim space aboard the old bomber, no one had seen the full picture before jumping. They'd known it would be cloudy, but not like this, not so dense that it swallowed the ground whole. They had no sightline, no confirmation of the drop zone, just a gut-level assumption that they were where they were supposed to be. For over 14,000 feet they plummeted in formation through a thick cotton shroud, trusting the plan, trusting the pilot, and trusting the coordinates they'd been given. Then, around 4,000 feet, the clouds finally broke, and that trust shattered. Water. Not a runway, not a road, not even a tree line. just cold, endless water. Lake Erie, and they were 4 miles offshore. The realization spread like panic in the wind. In the final frantic seconds before impact, the 18 jumpers scrambled mid-air to ditch what they could. Heavy boots, thick jackets, extra insulation meant to keep them alive at 20,000 feet was now guaranteed death in the water. But it wasn't enough. One by one, they hit the freezing lake. Helmets and reserve chutes were repurposed as makeshift flotation devices, but they just weren't designed for this. The water was bitterly cold, likely under 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and survival time was mere minutes. 2 of the jumpers, Robert Coy and Bernard Johnson, managed to keep their heads. They pulled their chutes around 3,000 feet, still processing the horrific realization that they had seconds to make decisions that would mean life or death. Meanwhile, back in the cockpit, Kearns had just caught a glimpse of something through a break in the clouds. Water. According to his co-pilot, he muttered, "I hope we didn't drop them over the lake." But it was already too late. Up above, he reached 30,000 feet and dropped the last 2 jumpers, this time, ironically, right over Ortner Airport where they were supposed to be in the first place. Back on the ground, chaos was starting to unfold. Ted Murphy, still circling in his Cessna, had never seen the bomber drop its load. He couldn't spot the skydivers either. That was because they weren't there. They were far away, off course and falling into disaster. And all of it, the misplaced trust, the catastrophic navigational error, the silence in the clouds, was invisible until the very last second. From the shore, a lone witness stood frozen in disbelief. Paul Potter, an off-duty Coast Guard officer, spotted the colourful stream of parachutes falling in a straight line. Not over land, but straight into the lake. Without hesitation, Potter leapt into action. He coordinated with local boaters, fishermen, anyone with a hull and a motor. Around 30 boats launched into the surf, but they were fighting a losing battle. Waves of up to 5 feet high and punishing winds battered the rescue attempt. Meanwhile, above, the B-25 bomber continued its climb, obliviously circling, preparing for its next drop. The crew had no idea what had just happened. They remained focused on altitude and airspeed while 18 souls below fought for their lives. Inside that fight were Robert Coy and Bernard Johnson, the only 2 who would make it out alive. They tore at their harnesses, kicked off their boots and desperately tried to stay afloat. For what felt like hours, they bobbed and thrashed, salt stinging their eyes and exhaustion biting at their limbs. At one point, Coy recalled spotting a vessel nearby. He waved and shouted. A man stood on the deck staring directly at him. And then the boat moved on. No radio call, no rescue, nothing. Hope began to fade until a fishing boat, a pleasure craft manned by 2 brothers, cut through the mist. They spotted Coy and Johnson and dragged them from the icy water just in time. The only ones. Abandoned parachutes drifted on the waves, eerily silent. Harnesses floated with no one left inside them. The first bodies recovered were lifeless. 16 jumpers had drowned. Most of them had never stood a chance. The bomber would eventually return and land after the second drop, which was flawless. 2 jumpers deployed right over Ortner 20 minutes after the first group vanished. A cruel irony. The correct drop zone had been reached, just not when it mattered the most. The aftermath of what should have been a thrilling skydiving spectacle was nothing short of gut-wrenching. As the reality of what had happened spread, the question on everyone's mind was the same. How could this happen? Well, the answer wasn't simple, but it was damning. This wasn't one mistake, it was a chain, a trio of tragic errors that snapped together at just the wrong moment. Error 1, the jumpers. Even expert skydivers are bound by one golden rule: never jump without seeing your target. But that day, 18 of the sport's best broke it, whether out of trust, excitement, or simple human error. Whatever it was, they leapt blind through thick clouds, unaware they were diving straight into open water. Error 2, the controller. In the Cleveland Air Traffic Control Center, a routine shift change turned deadly. The incoming controller, Engel Schmitz, made a fatal misidentification. On his radar screen, he thought he was tracking the B-25 bomber. In reality, he was following a much smaller Cessna. He gave Bob Kearns a heading he believed would put him over Ortner Airfield, but it didn't. It sent him miles off course out over Lake Erie. Error 3. The pilot. Kearns, piloting a slow-climbing World War II era bomber with no GPS and only a basic radio, failed to confirm his exact position. He never told air traffic control about the radio's limitation. It couldn't monitor navigation beacons and communicate at the same time. And by the time he spotted water through breaks in the clouds, it was already too late. He gave the green light anyway. 18 people jumped, following a plan made on the wrong assumption over the wrong terrain. And only 2 of them lived. As the lake reluctantly surrendered its dead, the fallout began. Paul Potter, the off-duty Coast Guard officer who witnessed the parachutes falling into the lake, became a key figure in the rescue effort. But despite his best efforts, 16 jumpers drowned. The bodies were recovered in the days that followed. Some of them were still tangled in parachute lines. Others had floated miles away. All of them had died horribly. Investigations kicked off almost immediately. In September, the National Transportation Safety Board issued its findings. Responsibility, they said, was shared. The pilot, the air traffic controller, and, yes, the jumpers themselves, experienced enough to know better, but still willing to leap blind. Bob Kearns lost his pilot certificate indefinitely. There was some speculation that mild hypoxia might have impaired his judgment, but in court it was ruled that his decision-making appeared otherwise unaffected. The FAA itself was also taken to court in a wrongful death lawsuit, and in 1972 it was officially found liable for the 16 deaths. The courts ruled the federal government negligent due to the controller's error. In response, some change did come. The Parachute Club of America, now known as the United States Parachute Association, introduced a new rule: no skydiving within 50 miles of any large body of water unless equipped with survival gear. A new rule born in blood. In the years that followed, skydivers returned to Lake Erie, but this time they were ready. They wore flotation devices. They followed every safety protocol and they jumped, not in defiance, but in memory. In 1968 and again in 1969, those tribute jumps honoured the 16 who didn't come back. It was a solemn salute to friends lost in the sky and a stark reminder of what happens when everything goes wrong all at once. It began as a free jump, an unexpected gift, a thrill amongst friends, something to remember with laughter. But it ended as the deadliest disaster in the history of recreational skydiving. A perfect storm of trust, miscommunication, and silence. And for 16 families, a day that was supposed to be unforgettable for all the right reasons became unforgettable for the worst one of all. Now, despite the tragic nature of the material, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you on the next one, and for now, I'll say bye-bye.